Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Ishvara. Very good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Welcome to you all. We begin today our study of Chapter 16, which I'll introduce in just a moment. Welcome also to all of our many viewers watching online. And I think we're going to enjoy this chapter quite a bit. We'll begin, as always, with some recitation. As I recite, be sure to read the translation and then repeat after me. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhir, Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhir, Jnana Yoga Vyavastitihi, Jnana Yoga Vyavastitihi, Dhanam Damascha Yajñascha, Dhanam Damascha Yajñascha, Swadhyayasthapaharjavam, Swadhyayasthapaharjavam, Ahimsa Satyamakrodhas, Ahimsa Satyamakrodhas, Tyagashantirapayshunam, Tyagashantirapayshunam, Dayabhuteshvalo luptvam, Dayabhuteshvalo luptvam, Mardhavam hrirachapalam, Mardhavam hrirachapalam, Tejah kshamadhriti shaucham, Tejah kshamadhriti shaucham, Adroho nati manata, Adroho nati man, Bhavanti samparam dhaivim, Bhavanti samparam dhaivim, Abhijatasya bharata, Abhijatasya bharata, Dambho darpo bhimanascha, Dambho darpo bhimanascha, Krodha parushyameva cha, Krodha parushyameva cha, Ajnanam chabhijatasya, Ajnanam chabhijatasya, Partha samparamasurim, Partha samparamasurim, Daivim Daivim sampadvimokshaya, Daivi sampadvimokshaya, Nibandhaya surimata, Nibandhaya surimata, Ma shucha samparam daivim, Ma shucha samparam daivim, Abhijato si Pandava, Abhijato si Pandava. Good. We'll let this slide be on the screen because we're going to see it before we see the rest of the chapter. So we begin our study, the chapter 16, Daiva Asura Sampat Vibhaga Yoga. That's a little long. Let me put it on the board. I think that would be helpful. You know that these titles are not part of the Gita. These titles have been added by later scholars, but they're important and helpful. So let's see this. Daiva, and I'll put some dashes in here. Asura Sampat Vibhaga Yoga, you know. Okay. Daiva Asura Sampat Vibhaga. Is that all on the screen? Yes. Good. These are compound words. That's actually one word. And the way you get the meaning of these compounds is usually starting at the end. So this is the yoga. And here yoga means chapter. A chapter of spiritual teachings here is called yoga. This is the chapter on the vibhaga, the division. Now, when you're talking about division, you're talking generally about a division between a division of what? So it's a division of a sampat. Sampat is that which you're endowed with, attributes or qualities. And here the division is between two kinds of sampat, two kinds of attributes or qualities you might be endowed with. One is Daiva Sampat. Daiva means of the devas, meaning divine. And Asura means of the asuras. Asuras are the so-called demons. So there is a Daiva Sampat, divine qualities, and Asura Sampat, demonic qualities, so-called demonic qualities. This chapter deals with the Vibhaga, the division of the two. Now, why this division is really important. There was an interesting comment we received recently with regard to a similar topic, and the commentator said, it seems very judgmental. And in today's politically correct times, being judgmental is a no-no. Don't be judgmental. And by the way, I actually agree with that part completely. That is, when we are judgmental of others, we're kind of like superimposing our own ideas and constructs on them, and that's not helpful. It's not fair. Here, this division is not for the sake of being judgmental about others, nor is it even for the sake of being judgmental about yourself. Some people are really interested in characterizing their own personalities. Did you ever take one of those personality tests like Myers-Briggs and all of this? And they give you all these categories, and some people are really fascinated. What category am I in? And then they talk to the spouse. What category are you in? And all of this stuff. Well, that's not what this chapter is about. This chapter is about sadhana, spiritual practice, and leading to moksha, leading to liberation. So the best way to introduce this chapter is by looking at the first half of verse 5. We'll go back to the beginning in just a moment. But notice the first half of verse 5, where Sri Krishna says, Daivi Sampat, these divine attributes, vimokshaya, lead you to moksha, lead you to liberation, keep you on a path of spiritual growth. On the other hand, asuri, look in the middle of the second line, asuri, the so-called demonic traits, nibandhaya, keep you in a state of bondage. So the reason for this vibhaga, the reason for this division is clear, and it's not to be judgmental, nor is it even to create these labels for what kind of personality type you are, but rather it's to understand our behavior and for us to cultivate behaviors that keep us on a path of spiritual growth and to avoid behaviors that take us away from that path of spiritual growth. And we'll give a lot of concrete examples Sri Krishna gives as we go along. Let's go back to the beginning of the verse. Let's see. And there's more introduction. I'll just put it in with the verses. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhir, Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhir, Jnana Yoga Vyavastitihi, Jnana Yoga Vyavastitihi, Dhanam Damascha Yajñascha, Dhanam Damascha Yajñascha, Swadhyayastapaharjavam, Swadhyayastapaharjavam. Sri Bhagavan, the Blessed Lord, Uvacha, he said to Arjuna. Notice this chapter does not begin with Arjuna's question. Some chapters do, many chapters don't. So Sri Krishna, in the role of teacher, has a responsibility to teach Arjuna what he needs to know. And of course, we are all figuratively looking over Arjuna's shoulder. You ever have that sense? This dialogue is taking place in the chariot, and figuratively speaking, we're all looking over Arjuna's shoulder, waiting to see what Sri Krishna teaches next. That's how I feel when I study Bhagavad Gita. So, in that context, Sri Krishna knows this topic must be taught for the sake of Arjuna's spiritual growth, for the sake of all of our spiritual growth. So he begins by identifying the Daiva Sampat, the divine qualities. And he starts by listing them. And he begins with Abhayam, fearlessness, and he continues, as you can see. Why is he listing these divine qualities? These divine qualities are like markers. Markers, in Sanskrit, we call them lakshana, things that point, things that indicators. There's a nice translation. Each of these terms is an indicator. An indicator of what? An indicator of your disposition. And your disposition is basically guided or not guided by a central factor that we have discussed here so many times, a central teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. We better return to it and make sure we understand. Conventional behavior is driven by raga and dvesha. This is such an important teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. Conventional behavior is driven by raga. And raga, please don't, to translate a desire, misses the point entirely. Raga is a compulsion to chase after whatever you think is desirable in life. Compulsion. Dvesha is a compulsion to run away from anything you feel is undesirable. So he's describing compulsive life. Yeah, please don't think that normal people are not compulsive in their behavior. Normal people meaning without any kind of mental illness, are extremely compulsive in their behavior. Think about your eating habits. There's some compulsivity there. That's normal. Normal compulsivity, but normal compulsivity is still compulsivity. It's still undesirable. Compulsivity means what? To be compelled means it's not your choice. right? That's what the word compelled means. Someone is pushing you. It's not your choice. You're compelled. In this case, compelled not by an external force, compelled by inner forces. Long ago, we talked about the Shad-Ari, the 6 enemies that dwell within you. We won't get into that. Right now, we'll just focus on these 2, Raga and Dvesha, 2 enemies. Enemies in the sense that, not enemies, they're like bosses. No one likes being bossed around, but inside of every person are these 2 inner bosses. Raga, forcing you to chase after things that look desirable. Dvesha, forcing you to run away from what you think is undesirable. Now, I said every word that Sri Krishna is giving us here is an indicator. Sanskrit word is lakshana. An indicator specifically about the presence or absence of raga and dvesha. That's what it is. Spiritual growth is characterized by the reduction of raga, dvesha. I'll say that again, it's that important. Spiritual growth is characterized by the lessening of raga, dvesha. Obviously, the increase of raga, dvesha means you're on the wrong path. So here, we'll look at each of these terms and see how they are, each of these terms in the first 2-3 verses, which are Daiva Sampat, the divine qualities, and see how each one of these qualities is an indicator of the reduction of raga, dvesha. First, abhayam, fearlessness. You're afraid you won't get what you want. You're afraid you'll get stuck with what you don't want. That's probably a bigger thing. You know, something that I don't know why this came to my mind. When I was a young man, I was working as an independent consultant, and I filed my own taxes. I hated filing the taxes. One year, I just said the heck with it, and I just kind of scribbled some stuff on my tax forms and submitted it. Wrong. And then, what I experienced for the next 7 years was fear. I was afraid I was going to be audited for the mess I made of the taxes. Fear. That is dvesha, right? So my wrong deed inflicted upon myself this fear which was an indicator of the presence of raga, dvesha. In this case, dvesha towards the IRS, which is not uncommon, by the way. All right. So abhayam, then, think about it as an indicator. Then, sattva samshuddhi. Shuddhi, purity. Samshuddhi, complete purity. Complete purity of what? Sattva here means mind. Be ready for that. Sattva has several meanings, which are determined by context. Here, sattva definitely means mind. Sattva samshuddhi, purity of mind. That's a term used so casually without really understanding what is purity of mind. Freedom from impurities. What are mental impurities? Isn't it interesting? People don't talk about that enough. What are the mental impurities that you're supposed to get rid of? Well, the mental impurities include things like hurt, anger, frustration, jealousy. These are mental impurities, and getting rid of them is a big deal. Notice that all of these kinds of mental impurities are all based on raga, dvesha. In the absence of raga, dvesha, you are completely comfortable with yourself, with your life, and with everyone in your life. There's no discomfort that arises at any moment. But when you have raga, dvesha, raga means you want the situation to be different, or you want the person to be different. One of the biggest problems in relationships in general, and marriage in particular, is wanting your spouse to be different. They are who they are. You are who you are. You are who you are for thousands of reasons. Your spouse is who they are for thousands of reasons. That's life. That's nature. So any kind of frustration or disappointment or wanting someone or something to be different from what they are is raga. And dvesha. You don't dvesha towards dvesha towards the situation as it is, and raga for the situation as you want it to be. Correct? This is the problem behind hurt, behind anger, jealousy, etc., etc. All of those so-called negative emotions. They're normal, but they are mental impurities. And in this case, they are obstacles to spiritual growth. Obviously, if you're so bogged down with hurt and frustration and anger, how can you really focus on these wonderful teachings of the Bhagavad Gita? So sattva samshuddhi is the next pointer to by the way, spiritual growth is always, notice I paused. I paused before saying the word always, because always is a tricky word. And I double-checked myself, and it checked out okay. So what is it always? Spiritual growth is, let me say, genuine spiritual growth is always accompanied by emotional growth. That's the always. Genuine spiritual growth is always accompanied by emotional growth. Emotional growth is what's taught, is what Sri Krishna is talking here about sattva samshuddhi, the absence of hurt, frustration, anger, jealousy. All of those so-called negative emotions go away with emotional growth. And they're all based on raga and dvesha. Enough said. Next, jnana yoga vyavastitihi. Vyavastitihi means engagement. Engagement in what? Jnana yoga. In yoga, and here yoga in the sense of being focused on something. And here being focused on jnana. Jnana here meaning spiritual wisdom. Engagement in being focused on spiritual wisdom. What are we doing now? That's exactly it. This kind of engagement is an indicator that raga and dvesha are being reduced. If your raga, dvesha were so strong, you wouldn't have bothered coming to class today, right? So the fact that you're sitting here is evidence that your raga, dvesha has already been significantly reduced. Next, dhanam, charity. The flip side of charity is miserliness. So the willingness to help others is dhanam. Dhammaha, self-control. And so dhanam and dhamma, these are indicators of a mature person. A person who is emotionally mature. Notice if you are so insecure about your financial situation, and I am smiling because I'm amazed, people who have a net worth of over $1 million can be extremely worried about their financial situation, right? Because they're worried about what is the name for the retirement account? 401k. So they're always worried, what's happening to my 401k? You got $1 million, well, say hundreds of thousands of dollars in that 401k, and they're worried, is it going up, is it going down? You're already wealthier than 95% of the people on this planet, and you're worried about the... You get the point? This is a problem of this is what this word dana is indicating. Are you mature enough that you have a healthy relationship with money? Nice. Dhammaha, self-control. That's pretty obvious, the necessity for self-control. One thing that's surprising is that adults lose self-control in the same way that children lose self-control. When children lose self-control, we call it childish. When adults lose self-control, we should call it what it is. It's childish. When you start shouting at someone, that's childish, right? That's what children do. That's not what adults do. So, another indicator, dhammaha. Self-control is an indicator of that spiritual and emotional growth, an indicator of the lessening of raga, dvesha. Yajnaha, worship, just in a general sense, any form of worship is an indicator, an obvious indicator of spiritual growth. You are more aware of your relationship with Ishvara, God of the cosmos. Next, swadhyayaha, self-study. And there are two ways of interpreting this. In ancient times, swadhyaya was a technical term used to refer to your daily study of the Vedas. You study the Vedas every day? Perhaps not, but in ancient times it was a requirement for you. So, and in a more modern sense, then swadhyaya now means any kind of spiritual study. So that is one interpretation of the word swadhyaya, spiritual study in general. And if you get a little bit literal here, swa means oneself. So the study of oneself. Very interesting interpretation. The study of oneself. And this is actually a favorite topic of mine, and that is when we learn to be self-observant in a healthy way, that is such a powerful and transformative practice. And I need to explain what I just said. Self-observant, you understand self-observant means to observe specifically, observe what you're doing and to ask yourself a crucial question, why am I doing this? So it's not just to observe what you're doing, but it's to understand your motivation for doing what you do. Now that in and of itself is a very difficult practice, to constantly question your motivation. And it can lead to negativity in your mind. So it has to be done properly in a completely non-judgmental way. So to observe yourself, to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I not doing that? But to ask yourself in a non-judgmental way, not to criticize yourself, but to understand yourself for the sake of further spiritual growth. That sounds that's so easy to say and so difficult to put in practice. But I can guarantee you, if you can put that in practice, that practice of non-judgmental self-observation, that one practice can transform your life. Guaranteed. Okay. Then, where did we leave off? Swadhyaya tapaha, austerities. Austerities is, here in this context, a willingness to deal with some discomfort for a greater good. The most common example of tapas would be fasting, for example. So fasting, you become very hungry, but you are willing to deal with the discomfort of hunger because you have a higher goal in mind. That willingness to deal with discomfort is another indicator of spiritual growth, certainly an indicator of the lessening of raga dvesha. And the last one here, arjavam. It's derived from the word riju, which means rope and suggests that which is straight. So the literal translation of arjavam is straightforwardness. I've translated here sincerity. Straightforward means you say what you think. There's no gap between what you say and what you feel. There is an alignment of what you feel, what you say, and what you do. We call that straightforwardness. It's the absence of, what it is. It's manipulation. We constantly, I don't know that I've ever talked about this. Conventionally, people manipulate others for the sake of gaining a certain kind of image. I want you to see me in a certain way, so therefore I say certain things, I don't say certain things. I act in a certain way, I don't act in other ways. All of that is done deliberately so that you look upon me in a certain way. That is the absence of arjavam. In fact, it's pretentiousness, which we're going to come to in a future verse. Let's continue. More indicators. Ahimsa satyam akrodhas. Ahimsa satyam akrodhas. Tyaga shantirapaishunam. Tyaga shantirapaishunam. Daya bhuteshvalo luptvam. Daya bhuteshvalo luptvam. Mardavam hrirachapalam. Mardavam hrirachapalam. Ahimsa. What a central teaching of the Vedas, of the Hindu tradition in general. Don't cause harm. Why do people cause harm? Raga, dvesha, right? If you felt utterly content in the complete absence of raga, dvesha, what could possibly compel you to hurt someone? Impossible, right? If you felt completely content. Which means people who cause harm do so because they're not completely content. Raga and dvesha drives harmful behavior. Satyam, speaking truthfully, kind of relates to what I just said. We want to manipulate the people in our lives for our own convenience. What a grim observation about conventional human behavior. But it is. Conventional human behavior is to manipulate others for the sake of your own convenience. You want others to behave in ways that you find nice. And that means if you have to say something untrue to manipulate them in that way, that's what happens. So speaking untruths are generally done for the sake of manipulating others. And that is an indicator of raga dvesha. Akrodha. Krodha, of course, is anger. Akrodha, absence of anger. We've talked about that before as one of the mental impurities. Tyagaha. Now, literally, it means abandonment, it means renunciation, and these are words that are a little hard to relate to. How about if we put it in a little different sense? Simplicity. Living a simple life. Many people have a tendency to make their lives very complex. And there's an upside and a downside. Complex means you are enjoying all the wonders that modern technology can offer you. You are enjoying what you can purchase financially. You are enjoying a lot of the goodies associated with modern life. But that complexity has a downside, and a downside, of course, is distraction. I think the most obvious example of that complexity is your cell phone and texting and this, WhatsApp and Twitter and all of this stuff. By the way, that all came a generation after me, so it doesn't work. None of that works for me. So I don't even use the cell phone, honestly. And why? I don't want that complexity in my life. To me, now, if you need a please don't get me wrong. You have to fulfill your responsibilities in day-to-day life. You need a cell phone. I agree to that. I know that. I understand that. But that cell phone brings with it all of this complexity. You can get caught up in that complexity, and it is a huge drain on your attention. Think of how, this may not be a problem for you, but it is a problem especially for younger people who spend so much time on the social media stuff. If they didn't spend all that time on social media, how much more time they would have available how about more time for Bhagavad Gita, right? As if young people are going to go for Bhagavad Gita. Anyway, you get my point. That is, that a complicated life leads to distractions, taking away your attention. So some simplicity in life is a great value. And to me, the word tyaga suggests that simplicity. Along with simplicity comes shantihi, just inner peace, tranquility. If you have a less complicated life, you will have more inner peace. And I remember making a decision as a young man. I had some money that needed to be invested. I decided not to put it in stocks, and not for any financial reason. I didn't want to put it in stocks because then I would be worrying about the stock market. And I didn't want my mind to be distracted in that way. So not based on financial considerations at all, based on this consideration, I want a less complex life. I don't want to have to worry about the stock market, etc. That's the idea here of shantihi. And apaishunam. Absence of paishana. Paishana is like constantly criticizing, to criticize another, to attack another. When you think of politics today, and you see how rudely politicians are treating each other, it's a little shocking, at least to me. I find it shocking how rude. These are the people leading our country, and they can't even behave in a civil manner. What is that? Okay, that uncivil behavior here is called paishanam. Here, apaishanam, the absence of that incivility. Then, daya bhuteshu. You have to break that word apart. Daya, compassion. Bhuteshu, for all beings, for all creatures. And in our meditation session, we talked about that terrible earthquake in Turkey and Syria. Compassion means to be aware of the suffering of others. Isn't that a very simple definition for compassion? Compassion is to be aware of the suffering of others, and if you're aware of the suffering of others, you'll be more inclined to do something about the suffering of others. But it starts with awareness, alertness, to appreciate and understand the terrible suffering going on, and obviously not just in Turkey and Syria, but around the world and in your community and in your home. Suffering, to be aware of that suffering. Aloluptam, loluptva. Lolupa is greed. Loluptva is greediness. Aloluptva, absence of greediness, that grasping, always wanting more. Kind of ties in with the simplicity we talked about before. Then, next, Mardhavam. Remember, each of these are indicators of spiritual growth and emotional growth. Next is Mardhavam. I like this word. Gentleness. Absence of aggression. And sometimes people can be very aggressive just with what they say. That aggressiveness in what you say when you want to get someone to do something for you, and if your words are very forceful, very aggressive, that actually causes hurt, right? It's hurtful to be on the other side of that, to be the one aggressed upon. You're hurting people with your words, not you, but that conventional behavior is that harsh words are used for the sake of manipulating others, and that harshness causes hurt. So Mardhavam. Then Hri. Hri, another beautiful word, usually translated as modesty, humility. And I think we all know that the truly wise person is one who knows how much they don't know. I think that is just an inescapable truth. Real wisdom is to understand your own limitations, your own shortcomings. So there's no place for pride there. In fact, that comes later. Next, achapalam. Chapalam is fickleness. Achapalam, absence of fickleness. Ragas and dveshas can change. And if ragas and dveshas change rapidly, your behavior is likely to be fickle. Another indicator, again, indicators of spiritual growth, indicators of the lessening of raga dvesha. And the last of these three verses, where Sri Krishna talks about the daiva sampat. Teja kshama dhriti shaucham, teja kshama dhriti shaucham, adroho nati manatha, adroho nati manatha, bhavanti samparam daivim, bhavanti samparam daivim, abhijatasya bharata, abhijatasya bharata. So a few more indicators. Tejaha, brilliance. Remember earlier we had swadhyaya, study? So if you're engaged in that study, naturally you will have tejas, brilliance, kshama, patience, forbearance, being able to put up with people and situations that are perhaps a little difficult. That patience is such an important quality, and especially when dealing with people, it's so easy to express your impatience and make another person uncomfortable. That person has already a gazillion problems, right? And then you express your impatience. Come on, let's go. And you give that person one more problem. And who is the problem? You are the problem. You become a problem for the person who already has a gazillion problems. Come on, give them a break. Patience. Then, dhritihi. Courage is a conventional definition. How about commitment? Commitment. Stay on track. Be true to your values. Don't compromise your values. Dhritihi. Another important indicator of spiritual and emotional growth. Shaucham. Purity, we've already talked a bit about impurities. Shaucha is always described in a twofold way, external and internal. Now, external, you think, okay, I take a bath every day, but that's only the beginning of external purity. How clean is your home? How clean is your desk? How clean is your car? And if they're not clean, that's impurity. That's external impurity. So that's one problem. And the other is internal, which we've already talked about, anger, hurt, etc., etc. So shaucham, purity, is an indicator of spiritual growth and emotional growth. And the last two here, adrohaha, absence of malice. Not being, actually more literally, not being aggressive, not being an aggressor. To do things without aggression. Back to mardavam, gentleness, etc., etc. And finally, na atimanita, absence of mana, absence of pride. Atimanita, excessive pride. Interesting, atimanita. There's a difference between a healthy pride and an unhealthy pride. So healthy pride, you've probably heard something like this. Healthy pride is, I'm great and so are you. Unhealthy pride is, I'm great and you're an idiot. So yeah, difference is pretty obvious. So these are given by Sri Krishna as indicators. He calls them daiva sampat, divine qualities, which are indicators of spiritual growth and emotional growth, which are indicators of the lessening of raga dvesha. And he concludes, he says that sampat daivim sampat bhavanti. These are daivim sampat. These are divine qualities. And in the last line, bharata, O Arjuna, these are divine qualities, abhijatasya, for one who is born. Now, that's going to lead to a big discussion right now. And that is, are you born with these divine qualities, or do you develop these divine qualities. It's a trick question. Are you born with divine qualities, or do you develop them? You've heard it said, nature versus nurture. That's what we're talking about, right? Are you born with them, nature, or do you develop them, nurture? And of course, the correct answer is both. Always both. We are who we are due to nature and nurture. Nature means, in modern times, nature means genetics, right? Our genes determine so much of who we are, not just physically, even who we are mentally. Personalities are largely rooted in genetics. In ancient times, of course, they didn't understand genetics, so they used words like vasana and samskara to describe that a person is born with certain predilections, certain inclinations. They said that these inclinations are the result of vasana, that is, inclinations carried over from prior lives. Samskara in this context means exactly the same thing. Inclinations carried over from prior lives. So in modern times, we call it genetics. In ancient times, they called it vasana and samskara. What it means is that we are all born not as blank slates. Period. So that is the nature part. So Sri Krishna says here that people are born with these divine qualities, but that's half of the statement. That's the nature part. What about the nurture part? The nurture part means it's up to you to cultivate. As we went through all of these qualities, if you find some of them are lacking in your life and your behavior, then it's up to you to cultivate them. Okay, let's continue. Now we get the Asura Sampat. Fortunately, just one verse now, but then Sri Krishna is going to really go for it. We'll see that in our next class. Right now, just one verse on Asura Sampat. Dambho darpo bhimanascha, Dambho darpo bhimanascha, Krodha parushyameva cha, Krodha parushyameva cha, Ajnanam chabhijatasya, Ajnanam chabhijatasya, Partha samparamasurim, Partha samparamasurim, Samparam asurim. So now we're getting the asura sampat, the so-called demonic traits, including, back up at the top, dambaha, hypocrisy. I think a better translation is pretentiousness. When you claim to be something or someone you are not. That is dambha. Some of you are following the news, this Representative Santos. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Mind-boggling. Anyway, that's a great example of dambha, pretentiousness, literally pretending to be what you're not. Obviously, an indicator of the absence of spiritual and emotional growth. Then darpaha, arrogance, which goes along with abhimanaha, pride. And this is the unhealthy pride, right? I'm great and you're an idiot, that kind of pride. So that's an unhealthy pride, and knowing that, concluding that you are better than others leads to darpa, arrogance. Arrogance is because you think you are better. And these are obviously huge psychological problems, indicators of the absence of both emotional and spiritual growth. Next indicator, krodha, anger, we've already discussed. Next indicator, parushyam. Interesting, parushyam literally means maleness, and it's pretty much the opposite of mardavam, that gentleness. So mardavam, gentleness, was the daiva sampad. Here, parushyam, literally maleness, but excessive maleness, this macho thing, or I've translated here harshness, and I think the word harshness really fits. And all of these indicators show the presence of raga dvesha, the absence of spiritual and emotional growth, and all of it is ultimately traced to ajnanam, ignorance, and specifically ignorance of your true divine nature. If you knew your true divine nature, all of these so-called demonic traits would just disappear, and only the so-called divine traits would remain. But due to failure to recognize your innate divinity, all of these problems ensue. This is Vedanta, and we've had this discussion many times before. So these demonic attributes, partha or Arjuna, these are sampadam, asurim, these are the demonic traits, and we have that word, you have to break apart cha and abhijatasya, ajnanam cha, and ajnanam. And all of these asuric traits, these demonic traits, exist for whom? Abhijatasya, for one who has been born, again, nature and nurture. Nature has to do with conditions at birth. For conditions at birth, an important one is the family into which you were born is a condition of birth, right? So Arjuna was born into an amazing family. Now, you and I were born into families that are, how can we say, good, but maybe not amazing. There's an important point here. All families have problems. Even Arjuna's family. So Yudhishthira had a gambling problem. Anyway, there's no there's no such thing as a perfect family. On the other hand, the family into which you were born is better than 98% of the families on this planet. Don't overlook that. If we focus on the shortcomings, now you may not have this problem, but I've met so many people who focus on the shortcomings of their families. Many of you won't do this. Something also of Indian culture, where children are less likely to look down on their parents or to be highly critical of their parents. So it's less of a problem for those raised in India. It's a huge problem for those raised outside of India. And that is to focus on the shortcomings of your family and to overlook all the blessings of your family. So this may or may not be an issue for you. It is an issue for many people. So to recognize nature versus nurture. Nature part, you lucked out due to being born into the family in which you were born. Imagine children born, this is a sad commentary on modern culture. Children who never meet their fathers, children whose mothers are addicted to drugs. That's not an uncommon story. So imagine the consequences of being born under those circumstances. and how far apart that is from the circumstances of your birth. Okay, one last verse. We already saw the first half of it. Daivi sampadvi mokshaya, Daivi sampadvi mokshaya, Nibandhaya surimata, Nibandhaya surimata, Ma shucha samparam daivim, Ma shucha samparam daivim, Abhijatosi Pandava, Abhijatosi Pandava. As we said before, Daivi Sampat, these divine qualities, Vimokshaya, lead to spiritual growth and culminate in enlightenment. They are indicators of spiritual growth, as opposed to Asuri, Asuri Sampat, the so-called demonic qualities, Mata, they are considered to be what? Nibandhaya. They lead to further bondage. They trap you in a life of suffering. And it's true. If people whose lives are governed by these so-called demonic qualities, they live lives of suffering. In fact, Sri Krishna is going to be talking much more about that, so we'll set that aside for now, but we'll see that in great detail. So, and finally, Arjuna has just been told that some people are born with divine qualities, some people are born with demonic qualities. Now Arjuna's worrying, which category do I fall into? And Sri Krishna says, Ma shuchaha. How would you say? Fikr mat karo. How's that? Don't worry. Don't worry, Arjuna. By the way, for our Sanskrit students, this is an injunctive. The of ashuchaha has gone away. And if you don't know that, it's pretty advanced Sanskrit grammar. Don't worry about it. Anyway, it's called an injunctive. Ma shuchaha, O Arjuna, don't worry. Daivim sampat, divine qualities, asi, you, abhijataha. You were born with these divine qualities, Pandava, O son of Pandu. Don't, therefore, ma shucha. You can just imagine, Arjuna getting worried, and then Sri Krishna, ma shucha. Don't worry, Arjuna, look at the family into which Arjuna was born and the qualities that Arjuna has. So Arjuna, you need not worry. And as I said before, that's true for all of us here. We were born into families that actually, if you weren't born in a good family, you wouldn't be sitting here today, right? The fact that we are gathered here today is evidence of incredible blessings in life, to have started life with such a family that we have come up in this manner and find such value in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Indicators of tremendous value. Okay. It's a good place to stop our class for today. We'll continue next week. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our Vedanta class at 10 o'clock. Come and join us. At 11 o'clock, Satsanga, question answer. So come with your questions at 11. And it's important to mention next Saturday is the day of Mahashivaratri. And the way we will celebrate Mahashivaratri, a little simpler, with a simple, short puja at the beginning of the meditation session at 10 o'clock, followed by a special meditation on Shiva for Shivaratri. So the meditation session will be our Shivaratri celebration. And this Bhagavad Gita class then will continue as normal. next Saturday. So we'll continue our study of chapter 16 at that time. And we can conclude now with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatahana Shranvan Utabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.